American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 271 to 280. Even though you have undergone Khorne's forced blessing, your size and height, including the Terminator armor, have reached nearly 3 meters. However, when facing the oncoming Primarch Mortarion, you still subconsciously felt a strong sense of crisis and a hint of fear. The terrifying aura that could not be matched by physical strength, and the vague suppression from the depths of your bloodline, completely ignited your rebellious spirit. You gripped the Bloodthirster's scythe tightly in both hands and took a few heavy steps forward. The heavy blood-red magnetic boots almost embedded themselves into the metal floor, emitting a series of dull thuds. You wanted to use this to restore the fighting will that had been gradually weakened by the other party's appearance. You should be fearless, even when facing a traitor Primarch. Just then, Mortarion, with a white respirator covering half of his face, revealing only his pale forehead and nose, and a pair of yellow eyes, spoke, his voice authoritative and deep. "My son, my death shroud, what have you done? Why do you also have the same disgusting smell as Horus and Typhus?" His tone seemed to carry a deeply hidden anger and disappointment. You temporarily stopped your advance and remained in place. You stared at the massive Primarch through the lenses of your metal helmet and slowly said, "The power from the Chaos Gods forcibly blessed my body and almost changed the essence of my soul. Lord Mortarion, this is the real reason why the Emperor forbade you Primarchs from exploring the warp. The Imperial truth may be a lie, but it is for your own good. The seemingly invincible terrifying power is ultimately just a precarious castle in the air and an unattainable mirage, and will eventually only turn you into the toys and puppets of the Chaos Gods." You told him part of the truth without hesitation. However, your words did not have any earth-shattering effect. The massive Mortarion simply stopped his advance. He stared at you from afar, his deep and authoritative voice once again reaching your ears. "My death shroud, I am different from you. I never allow myself to indulge in the power of the psychic. I only use it, control it. I make the psychic serve as my slave." At this moment, Mortarion's massive form was like a dormant volcano about to erupt. The terrifying giant scythe named Silence had already been slowly lifted into his hand, as if he would launch an incomparably fierce attack on you in the next second. "Lord Mortarion, wake up, and put away your disgusting arrogance." Even the Emperor himself would not dare to utter such arrogant words. The chaotic power of the warp has never been something that humans or any carbon-based life can completely control. The subtle erosion and corruption of the Chaos Gods will magnify the flaws in your heart, gradually change the essence of your soul, and eventually make you fall into a humble ant in their palms. You drove the Khorne Terminator armor and stepped forward fearlessly. Let me tell you, Warmaster Horus's soul has long been eroded and corrupted by the power of the Chaos Gods. This is the truth of why the fallen him launched this great rebellion. If it weren't for my intervention, you would have followed in his footsteps. You subconsciously gripped the Bloodthirster's scythe in your palm and continued to speak to Mortarion, who seemed to be listening silently. "Lord Mortarion, even your first captain, Typhus, is secretly a follower of Nurgle, one of the Chaos Gods. Think about any suggestions he has given you. Think about where the entire Death Guard fleet is now in the warp. And look at the suns around you who are suffering endless pain. All the truth is as dazzling as the Emperor's psychic power." The huge roar from deep within your chest constantly shook the entire ancient hall. Countless Death Guards scattered throughout the hall, enduring endless pain, also seemed to hear your words, and they all turned their gazes towards you and the Primarch. "Not long ago, my scythe, Silence, pierced deep into Typhus's chest. He has already paid the price of death for it." Just then, Mortarion, who had been silent, suddenly spoke to you. His deep voice slowly echoed in the ancient hall. Also, a considerable number of Death Guard's eyes were focused on his massive form. "Now is the time for you to pay the price. Your bloodline shell may have once been my son, but your soul is definitely not my death shroud. Pay for the lives of my sons, demon." Before he finished speaking, the massive Mortarion suddenly launched a terrifying charge forward, constantly shaking the air. Almost in the blink of an eye, wearing the barbarous armor, he had already crossed hundreds of meters and rushed to your front. In an instant, the giant scythe, Silence, dancing in his palm, fell heavily towards the top of your head like a terrifying falling star. "Mortarion, The blessing of chaos is never as simple as you think. As long as the chaos gods are willing, their followers will be immortal. Typhus will be resurrected from death. He may even have already been resurrected. I have come to save the Death Guard, I am the Emperor's. In a flash of lightning, you roared loudly while raising the Bloodthirster's scythe tightly in both hands. The Primarch's extremely terrifying attack speed made it impossible for you to dodge, so you could only choose to resist head-on. Along with a deafening metallic collision and a series of invisible shock waves that suddenly burst out violently around you. The words you hadn't finished speaking came to an abrupt halt. Even your jaws, hidden inside the metal helmet, were tightly clenched, creaking. Your Bloodthirster's scythe and Mortarian's giant scythe, Silence, collided heavily. In an instant, a series of violent buzzing vibrations actually occurred inside your Khorne Terminator armor. Even your two blood-red magnetic boots sank deeply into the metal floor. The next second, Mortarian, as if he had never listened to anything, only glanced down at you. The giant scythe, Silence, tightly held in his palm, suddenly swept sideways towards your side. HMPH. You gritted your teeth and looked at the Primarch Mortarian, who would not listen to advice and could even be said to be impervious to reason. You quickly pulled out the magnetic boots that were stuck in the metal floor and slightly adjusted the direction of the Khorne Terminator armor. At the same time, the Bloodthirster's scythe, tightly held in both hands, also suddenly fell and swung heavily towards the opponent's weapon. Clang! In an instant, along with another fierce collision between the two sides' weapons. Your tall body only retreated 2 steps backwards, and then completely stopped. Damn it, come on. You slightly raised the metal helmet with a blood-colored metal horn. You stared at Mortarian's yellow eyes, which revealed coldness and indifference, and couldn't help but roar. Clang, 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 seeming to realize that your physical strength and reaction speed far exceeded those of normal Astartes or Chaos demons. Once again raising his thick arms wrapped in metal armor. Mortarian, constantly wielding the giant scythe, Silence, was like a tireless terrifying machine, swinging heavily towards all directions of your tall body. You also tried your best to exert extremely powerful strength and skill, continuously blocking Mortarian's terrifying attacks again and again. However, just as you had gradually adapted to the opponent's attack rhythm, and quickly absorbed the foreign power gained from the blessing in your tall body, and even wanted to launch a counterattack attempt towards the opponent. Mortarian's violently wielded giant scythe, Silence, suddenly stopped the next frantic attack. Oh, the endurance, resisting the corruption of the warp tells me that the dead Typhus has been resurrected. Nameless demon, you didn't deceive me. Mortarian, slightly blinking his dim yellow eyes, spoke suddenly in a deep and authoritative voice. Your initial clash with the Primarch came to a temporary halt. The massive Mortarian unhesitatingly retracted his great scythe, Silence. You also hesitated slightly, eventually lowering the butcher's nails, which you had been gripping tightly in your palm. Nameless demon, although the spirit of the Terminus Est has assured me of your origins, and Typhus is indeed reviving as you said, I still cannot believe you are my son. Who exactly are you? At that moment, Mortarian's yellowish eyes widened slightly, his gaze, so cold it bordered on lifeless, fixed intently on you. His imposing and deep voice of inquiry also caused the Death Guard around him to subconsciously focus their attention on your blood-red form. Just as the 21 Primarchs each possess their own unique abilities or life experiences, so do I am merely a token of the Emperor. If you truly wish to know my name, then call me 22. You raised your metal helmet, adorned with a crimson horn, and spoke with a calm tone, the butcher's nails dangling from your hand. Your words seemed to stir a small commotion among some of the Death Guard, even though they were still enduring the endless torment brought by the Destroyer Plague. Such astonishing news temporarily diverted their attention from their ceaseless suffering. However, the massive Mortarian seemed utterly unmoved. He merely scrutinized you carefully with his yellowish eyes. You slightly parted your lips behind the metal helmet, exhaling slowly. Unlike your encounter with Corvus Corax, you did not reveal the whole truth to the Pale King, another Primarch. Even though you ultimately saved him from the corruption of the Chaos God Nurgle. He remains a traitor Primarch who betrayed the Emperor and the Imperium of Man. The 22nd Primarch? It seems the old man's bad habits die hard. The silent Pale King was the first to break the silence, his imposing and deep voice slowly reaching your ears. You seemed to keenly detect a fleeting complex emotion deep within Mortarian's yellowish eyes. It seemed to contain hatred, disgust, jealousy, arrogance, and a few traces of nostalgia. 22, is it? You don't seem to be lying, but you're not telling the whole truth either. However, dealing with typhus is the primary issue we need to address. Mortarian, quickly concealing his emotional fluctuations, suddenly lowered his head, his yellowish eyes looking down at you. The crimson horn above your metal helmet seemed to glint slightly. You nodded emphatically in agreement. At that moment, the Pale King Mortarian once again surveyed the large group of his sons in the ancient hall with his cold, lifeless gaze. When he saw that some of the Death Guard in the outer ranks, tormented by the Destroyer Plague, had begun to beg for death, Mortarian, who had been showing no emotion, finally believed your intentions and chose to cooperate with you. You and Mortarian exchanged a few brief words. You decided to find a way to completely eliminate typhus and save the Death Guard Legion from being repeatedly tormented by endless suffering. The Pale King, clad in the Barbaran armor, turned to lead the way. The great scythe Silence was held in his hand, swaying up and down with each step. Through your helmet's lenses, you cast one last glance at the Death Guard in the hall. Without hesitation, you activated your Terminator armor and followed the Pale King's massive figure, under the silent gaze of countless suffering eyes. You quickly left the ancient hall, heading towards the bridge. As you ventured deeper, you keenly noticed that the warped taint of chaos corruption was becoming increasingly severe. Besides the clusters of green mist drifting randomly in the air, you also saw horrific changes occurring to a large amount of metal equipment in the upper decks. Metal components either rotted and stank, dripping green pus all over the place, or twisted and trembled as if possessed by a life of their own, occasionally emitting bizarre shouts. You could even faintly hear the cheerful laughter of countless nurglings in your ears. At that moment, at the far end of the wide passage leading to the bridge, a group of mortal crew members transformed into Nurgle zombies by the walking plague, along with dozens of towering Death Guard librarians with bellies swollen like balls, appeared within your line of sight. These librarians with powerful psychic abilities were almost unable to resist the corruption of chaos. This also caused them to fall more easily than other Death Guard who were enduring suffering. At this moment, these Death Guard librarians, their bellies swollen like balls, activated their green power armor, which had multiple festering, decaying wounds. They also vigorously swung their decaying weapons in their hands, launching a slow but determined attack towards you with gleeful smiles. The silent Mortarian did not utter a single word. He merely slightly vibrated the great scythe Silence, which he held tightly in his hand. The next second, his massive body, like a volcanic eruption, charged head-on into the enemies ahead with an irresistible force. You took a deep breath, instinctively tightening your grip on the butcher's nails. You also immediately activated your Khorne Terminator armor and launched a combat charge. Instantly, the great scythe Silence and the butcher's nails emitted terrifying shrieks in midair, their sounds echoing throughout the corridor for a long time. One Nurgle zombie after another was smashed into flying rotten flesh by the two of you in your combat charge. More than a dozen pot-bellied, ever-smiling Death Guard librarians swung their decaying weapons forward fiercely. But they were repeatedly cleaved from top to bottom by Mortarian's great scythe Silence, along with their power armor, becoming rotten corpses split in two. You also suddenly halted your heavy charge, and the butcher's nails, with its blood-red living eyeballs darting wildly, swept forward powerfully. 5 or 6 Death Guard librarians, who had no intention of dodging, were torn in half by the powerful force and sharp blades, spraying countless nauseating green pus. At this moment, neither you nor the Pale King Mortarian had any intention of showing mercy to these completely fallen Death Guard. However, just as you and Mortarian were about to completely eliminate the fallen librarians in front of you and clear the area, in the deeper part of the corridor at the end, swarms of black bees carrying terrifying humming sounds suddenly attacked in your direction. You accelerated your swings with the butcher's chaincleaver. Your frenzied hacking cleaved through and killed over a dozen nearby fallen librarians. The foul-smelling ichor from their bodies splattered incessantly onto your Terminator armor, corroding noticeable marks. Those black swarms are the manifested expression of the destroyer plague. Typhus has arrived. Be careful. You instinctively turned your gaze. You stared at the rapidly approaching destroyer plague, cautiously reminding Mortarion, who was charging into the enemy ranks. No need to worry. I can kill it once, and I can kill it a second time. Mortarion didn't even turn his head. He simply continued to swing his great scythe. Silence, utterly uprooting and sweeping away the remaining fallen librarians before him. You heard his exceedingly arrogant words. You couldn't help but frown. But now, another battle was about to begin, and you had no time to say anything more. The next second, swarms of black wasps, so numerous they occupied most of the tunnel space, surged relentlessly towards you. You slowly activated your Khorne Terminator armor, retreating backward. The Butcher's Chaincleaver, gripped tightly in your palm, was practically swung into a bloody blur, encompassing a radius of several meters. The sharp edge continuously cleaved and drove away the black wasps that repeatedly approached you. You quickly made a rational assessment of the situation before you. You planned to rely on the blessings of Khorne and your demonic equipment to withstand this wave of Nurgle's corrupting assault. Otherwise, the harassment from the black wasps would be endless. Just then, Mortarion, standing motionless with the great scythe Silence in his hand, suddenly raised a massive hand heavily encased in metal. In an instant, an extremely powerful psychic sorcery erupted from his massive form. In the blink of an eye, it dispersed the black wasp swarms that had almost obscured half the tunnel. Only a small portion of the black wasps continued to swirl around you. You had no time to think about what this meant. You simply accelerated your swings with the Butcher's Chaincleaver, intensifying the destruction of the few remaining black wasps. My pathetic son, my former right-hand man, hiding is not the battle creed of the Death Guard. Mortarion broke the silence once more, his deep, imposing voice speaking slowly through his respirator to the dimly lit depths of the tunnel. You completely scattered the last swarm of black wasps, and the blessing within you dispelled some of the discomfort brought by the corrosive corruption. You ran your hand back and forth over the cold handle of the Butcher's Chaincleaver. You immediately activated your Khorne Terminator armor, stepping forward with blood-red magnetic boots, treading on the scattered flesh and wreckage, and walked to Mortarion's vicinity. Your gaze also fixed on the shadowy depths of the tunnel. You had prepared for another fierce and arduous battle. Mortarion, before you kill me, I was indeed your gene son, and indeed your first captain, Typhus, but now, risen anew from the silence of death, bearing the generous will of our Lord Father Nurgle. I am Nurgle's herald, the master of the Destroyer Hive, my name is Typhon. Just then, accompanied by a deep voice echoing incessantly within the tunnel and a series of heavy footsteps. An equally towering figure, 3 meters tall, slowly emerged from the dimly lit depths of the tunnel. Its Terminator power armor had completely turned a decaying green. Even the armor on its abdomen had become grotesquely distended. Countless streams of viscous, yellowish-green liquid flowed continuously from the seams of its armor, almost covering every inch of the metal floor behind it. At the same time, behind it, the form of its power pack seemed to have vanished. Replaced by a destroyer hive, with tendrils as thick as arms, shaped like funnels, constantly spewing wisps of black wasps outwards. Typhon or Typhus, my detestable son, why do you make me so angry and disappointed? Mortarion, his tone seemingly devoid of emotion, slowly raised the great scythe Silence towards the Nurgle's chosen one, who had been transformed into Typhus, and uttered a deep, questioning voice. However, before Typhus, who had stopped his heavy steps, could utter taunts and jeers, Mortarion's massive body once again launched a terrifying charge forward. But Typhus, transformed into Nurgle's chosen one, showed no intention of retreating. He, with metal horns growing from his helmet, quickly brandished a demon scythe stained with endless corruption, and heavily collided with the descending great scythe Silence. In an instant, deafening sounds of metal clashing rang out incessantly, echoing repeatedly throughout the tunnel. You took a deep breath. You also vigorously activated your Khorne Terminator armor and charged towards the enemy ahead. The Butcher's Chaincleaver, with its constantly rotating blood-red living eyeballs, swiftly slashed through the air, heavily cleaving down upon Typhus's corrupted body. Hound of Khorne, faced with your sudden attack, Typhus, who had temporarily fallen into a disadvantage, couldn't help but roar with a deep voice. It first forcefully parried the repeated hacking from the great scythe Silence. The demon scythe, abruptly changing direction, also heavily collided with your butcher's chaincleaver. Immediately afterwards, swarms of black wasps, constantly spewing out from the destroyer hive, rapidly swarmed towards your blood-red body. However, facing a Primarch in you, who had been blessed by Khorne alone, even Typhus, who had become Nurgle's chosen one, was by no means a match. Just as Typhus was trying to use the destroyer plague to hinder and weaken you, Mortarion's great scythe Silence had already reaccumulated terrifying power, heavily sweeping towards the opponent's distended power armor. Typhus, who had no time to dodge, was easily cut open on half of his body. Countless streams of viscous, yellowish-green ichor, along with rotten and festering organs, splattered outwards. However, for ordinary Astartes, a severe injury comparable to a fatal wound was merely a superficial wound for Typhus, who had become Nurgle's chosen one. It merely swayed its nearly shattered green power armor. The abdominal wound, forcibly cut open by the great scythe Silence, had already completely healed. Join our family, Pale King. The power of the grandfather is beyond the imagination of us mortals. Typhus seemed to emit a low chuckle in Mortarion's direction. However, at this moment, you, who were enduring the constant erosion and corruption from swarms of black wasps, suddenly stepped forward. You wielded the butcher's chaincleaver with one hand, forcefully blocking the heavy strikes from the demon scythe. Your other hand actually pulled out a newly activated Melta Bomb from below your power pack. You vigorously activated your Khorne Terminator armor and rammed forward. You successfully shoved the about-to-explode Melta Bomb deep into Typhus's unprotected, distended, and corrupted abdomen. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. You released your grip on the Melta Bomb. Quickly, you pulled your thick arm, constantly corroded by the sticky, foul-smelling green blood, away. Your two blood-red magnetic boots heavily stomped on the ground, causing the Terminator armor to continuously retreat backward. In a flash of lightning, Typhus, whose gaze had fallen, couldn't help but let out a roar of shock and anger. How dare you! He instantly raised a massive hand covered in metallic armor. He was about to plunge it fiercely into his decaying body, intending to pull the soon-to-explode Melta Bomb from the wound. However, Nurgle's chosen's vaunted ability to heal injuries completely became Typhus's death knell. His thick fingers hadn't even touched his corrupted body when the large wound, forcibly opened by you, instantly vanished, completing its healing. At the same time, just as you had begun to retreat backward, Mortarion, clad in the Barbaran plate, quickly stepped forward. The giant scythe, Silence, which suddenly danced in his palm, swiftly cut through the air, easily severing Typhus's thick arm that wanted to tear open his corrupted body again. In the next moment, before the severed arm, emitting a green, rotten stench, could completely fall to the ground, Mortarion suddenly widened his turbid yellow eyes, and the giant scythe, Silence, gripped in his palm, smoothly reversed its direction of attack. Like lightning, it brutally swept toward the neck of Typhus's rotting power armor. The terrifying speed and power contained in this attack far exceeded your imagination. Even the sharp edge of the giant scythe, Silence, seemed to create fleeting, dazzling sparks as it rubbed against the air. In an instant, Typhus, who had just lost his arm, didn't even have time to wield the demon scythe in his other hand to defend or parry. Pung! And along with the sound of the collision as the severed arm, emitting a green, rotten stench, finally hit the ground. The giant scythe, Silence, with its sharp edge flashing past, was quickly held in Mortarion's palm, and his massive form instantly retreated backward. Hiss, no! In an instant, Typhus's tall, ball-like body, with its slightly tilted and fractured horned helmet, ceased all movement. Countless scorching, terrifying rays of light erupted from his bloated, corrupted body. Countless terrifying magma, violently expanding to near boiling point, completely melted Typhus's tall body, leaving not a trace behind. At this moment, Nurgle's chosen, Typhus, was successfully banished back to the Garden of the Grandfather by you and Mortarion. You stared at the metal ground, gradually melting within a radius of dozens of meters, and the wisps of smoke rising up. The corners of your mouth, hidden behind the metal helmet, revealed a hint of a smile. Nurgle's herald is dead. Banished back to the warp, he won't be back for a while. Next, the problem we should solve is how to eliminate the destroyer plague of the Death Guard. For now, perhaps only the Emperor on Terra can do it. You stared at Mortarion's massive back and said indifferently. However, at this moment, the sharp edge of the giant scythe, Silence, suddenly fell. Hong ran toward the top of your head. Mortarion. You subconsciously let out an angry roar. You instantly raised the butcher's nails in your palm, forcibly blocking Mortarion's sudden attack. 22. The two things I hate most are, first, being told to my face that it's all for my own good, and second, that undying old man in the Imperial Palace on Terra. And you keep saying it over and over again. You're simply courting death. Mortarion slightly blinked his turbid yellow eyes, his nearly dead, cold gaze fixed on your helmet's visor. His dignified and deep voice echoed in your ears. You were almost laughed to death by the Primarch's twisted thinking. You suddenly let out an angry roar from deep within your chest, driving the thick arms of the Terminator armor to exert force upward, forcibly pushing away the sharp edge of the giant scythe. Silence. Mortarion, you have come all the way from the toxic gas planet of Barbarous to this day. What are you fighting for? Your hands tightly gripped the cold handle of the butcher's nails. Your gaze fixed on Mortarion, who once again wielded the giant scythe. Silence, and you shouted in a deep voice. What am I fighting for? For myself. And only for myself. Mortarion responded to you with a near shout from behind his respirator. In the next second, the giant scythe, Silence, which suddenly cut through the air, once again brutally chopped down toward your blood-red body. Clang! The butcher's nails and the giant scythe, Silence, collided again, erupting in a thunderous roar. After hearing the other party's words, you fell into complete silence. You no longer tried to persuade the Primarch with words. You had developed a deep disappointment in the Pale King, Mortarion's fickleness. Perhaps the Primarchs who were able to participate in the Horus heresy were really all problem children and mental illness patients. You quickly drove the Khorne Terminator armor to step forward, and the suddenly trembling butcher's nails skillfully deflected the terrifying attack of the giant scythe. Silence. You immediately wielded the butcher's nails, brutally sweeping toward Mortarion's massive body. However, an extremely powerful psychic force instantly surged out from Mortarion's massive body. He stared at your metal helmet with those turbid yellow eyes, and the psychic force, seemingly with imprisonment properties, actually tightly controlled your blood-red body. At the same time, a brass-colored energy pistol was suddenly pulled out by Mortarion from behind the Barbaran plate's waist. That was a gift from the Emperor of the past to the Primarch Mortarion, the ancient Xenos energy pistol, Lumina. Your gaze fixed on the gradually lighting up brass muzzle, and you once again erupted in a deafening roar. You desperately drove the Terminator armor, barely breaking free from the heavy imprisonment of the powerful psychic power. At this moment, the ancient Xenos energy pistol, triggered by Mortarion, instantly fired a terrifying energy beam that could melt through Terminator armor. You didn't have time to dodge at all. You could only grit your teeth and raise the butcher's nails to block it in front of you, trying to use the demon weapon's sturdiness to make a final block. Unfortunately, the fleeting terrifying energy not only melted the butcher's nails. Even your entire arm and half of your shoulder were completely dissolved by the terrifying energy, dissipating into the air. You suddenly spat out a mouthful of scalding blood in the metal helmet, and the mostly incomplete blood-red body seemed to have lost the support of strength, causing you to kneel on one knee. At this moment, Mortarion, carrying the giant scythe, Silence, and the Xenos pistol, Lumina, in his palm, slowly stepped forward. 22. Don't blame me. For my great vision within reach, you are just a stepping stone on the way, even Horus is the same. Mortarion, looking down at you slightly, blinked his turbid yellow eyes and said in an almost cold tone. Mortarion, weakness and ignorance have never been the obstacles to human survival. The stupidity and arrogance of not being able to see the future are your ways to court death. You slowly raised your only remaining palm and took off the battle-scarred metal helmet. You used the blood-stained corners of your mouth to pull out a contemptuous smile filled with a hint of sarcasm toward the other party. At this moment, Mortarion, looking down at you, seemed to have fallen into unspeakable silence. The nearly dead, cold gaze in those turbid yellow eyes seemed to become even more ruthless and indifferent. And just as he quickly raised the Xenos pistol, Lumina, aiming the muzzle at your forehead. Your palm also took advantage of the metal helmet's cover to quietly fumble for the detonation device below the power pack. Mortarion, the 22nd Primarch, the Pale Cain, greetings to you. You pressed the detonation device belonging to countless melta-bombs without hesitation. The next moment, accompanied by a terrifying tremor that even a Gene Sire could hardly balance against its massive form. The interior of the Death Guard's flagship, the Terminus, seemed to emit an incomparably shrill metallic screech. This, resembling the agonizing lament of the Terminus machine spirit, was not all. There were also continuous explosive impacts and searing flames. Countless Death Guard, suffering the endless torment of the destroyer plague throughout the ship, were either completely consumed by the fiery explosions or swept into the depths of the warp. Ha 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 ha, at this moment, you, kneeling on one knee, couldn't help but unleash a burst of unrestrained, maniacal laughter towards Mortarion, the Pale Cain. Intel and Xeno's energy pistol, held at point-blank range, abruptly unleashed a terrifying blast of energy, completely melting your entire head. Your mangled corpse fell heavily to the ground, the sound of its impact completely drowned out by the approaching roar of explosions. The surging inferno swiftly engulfed Mortarion, whose deathly gaze seemed to betray a hint of inexplicable relief. Your ruined husk was utterly destroyed. Yet, your consciousness did not entirely dissipate. Your vision seemed to rapidly ascend, gradually leaving the Terminus flagship, now engulfed in a chain reaction of explosions. Your slowly fading consciousness unexpectedly entered the chaotic and treacherous warp without reservation. Your vision seemed to vaguely glimpse a green giant hand, its knuckles thick and fleshy, the back covered in disgusting pustules, slowly piercing through the warp's chaotic currents, and scooping up the Terminus flagship, which was about to completely explode and disintegrate. Even some of the Death Guard who had been swept into the depths of the warp were retrieved by the green giant hand and gently placed back inside the ship's interior. In your fading consciousness, you seemed to hear a series of kind, honest laughs. The green giant hand, cradling the Terminus flagship, slowly turned its direction and crashed down towards your location. However, before panic could arise from the depths of your consciousness, which had not yet completely dissipated, accompanied by a series of suddenly surging warp ripples, a red giant hand, seemingly entwined with wisps of vengeful spirits and layers of bloody rivers, abruptly revealed its long-hidden presence. The two giant hands collided with a deafening crash, and the resulting warp ripples seemed to accelerate the dissipation of your consciousness. This caused the red giant hand to instantly abandon its struggle with the green giant hand, and hastily clawed towards your direction. However, at this moment, a terrifying psychic force, erupting from the deeper reaches of the turbulent warp, forcefully annihilated your lingering consciousness, which was fading too slowly. Your vision was completely plunged into endless darkness. Yet, a different, hazy scene seemed to appear before your eyes. Upon an ancient chessboard interwoven with black and white, a giant, bronze-colored hand gently picked up an exquisite and ornate black tarot card. And upon this incredibly smooth surface, the card representing the Pale Cain, named the High Wall of Contempt, first transformed into a pale heart being devoured by maggots, and then reverted to the High Wall of Contempt. But the next moment, the High Wall of Contempt on the card reverted back to the pale heart being devoured by maggots. You seemed to hear a sigh filled with faint disappointment. Your vision completely lost its final focus. You are dead. This simulation has ended. Time elapsed. The retainable options obtained from this simulation are as follows. 1. The Blood God's Armor of Glory. Corn, please choose with caution. Note: this is a Hades-type custom Terminator power armor, a death shroud, transformed into a demonic equipment through the powerful blessing and infusion of the evil god Khorne. Note: it can not only greatly enhance the wearer's melee combat ability and physical strength, but if worn for a sufficiently long time, the Terminator power armor, constantly sucking the blood of enemies, may undergo an ultimate evolution far beyond the wearer's imagination. Note: however, if the wearer uses this demonic equipment for a long period of time, the desire for slaughter and blood will become increasingly difficult to control, eventually leading to becoming a bloodthirsty killer, a puppet in the hands of the evil god Khorne. Note: No one can escape Khorne's gaze, especially for you, who have once approached the red line of corruption. Note: Confucius Khorne said, "Sacrifice life for righteousness, only through hacking and slashing." 2. Scythe and Pistol. Annihilation and Beacon, Masterclass. Note: these are the personal weapons belonging to the Gene Sire, Mortarion, the Pale King. Among them, the giant scythe, Annihilation, may have an unspeakable relationship with Mortarion's Xenos warlord foster father. As for the Xenos energy pistol, Beacon, it is a special gift given to him by his human biological father, the Emperor. Note: the giant scythe, Annihilation, seems to have been forged using some lost Xenos technology, and its sturdiness is such that even Melta weapons can hardly damage it. As for the Xenos energy pistol, Beacon, its terrifying power, capable of melting through Terminator armor, makes it a rare and precious piece of Xenos technology. Otherwise, it would not have become one of the Emperor's collectibles. Note: it is said that within the barrel of the Xenos energy pistol, Beacon, lies hidden an ultimate secret about the dragon god Star Xenos cult, which even the Emperor has not discovered. Note: with a scythe in my left hand and a pistol in my right, I wear the barbarous armor, slaying people and demons alike. 3. Pebble Kidney, Mortarion's Regret, Primarch. Note: this Pebble Kidney replica, about half the size of a palm, belongs to the yet-to-be-corrupted Pale King Mortarion. Perhaps this is the only organ tissue of the Gene Sire, who has already become a demon prince, that has not been corrupted. Note: it seems to have been blessed and enhanced by the Emperor himself. Note: the Pebble Kidney, working in conjunction with the Second Heart, can bring you extremely powerful detoxification abilities. Various toxins that could obliterate a small Xenos race will not harm your body at all. As for the hidden special abilities within, you need to discover them separately. Note: this is a terrified cry from the great fluttering moth, Mortarion, Father. Note: the Emperor seems to believe that you have reached your own limit, and that the failure to save the unfilial son's fate of corruption has nothing to do with you. After all responsibility lies in the warp. This simulation time has exceeded 24 hours, simulator wear and tear has been exempted. Cooldown time. 0 current available cooldown time. 8,043 hours. Consumed cooldown time? By the time Luo Sha came back to his senses, the simulation was already over. But his gaze didn't immediately scan the reward options. Instead, he carefully reviewed the records left by this simulation. Then, Luo Sha, who had narrowed his eyes, straightened his back slightly, which had been slumped in the metal seat. He subconsciously raised a hand with sharp fingertips and scratched his stubble-covered, bluish chin. Tisk, let's not talk about the near fall, since it's not the real body descending anyway. But as the number of simulations increases, the various petty actions of the Chaos Gods, especially Khorne's attention to me, becomes more and more obvious, and it's almost to the point of being covetous. Perhaps in a certain simulation, when the body reaches a real moment of crisis, I can rely on the Emperor's protection and use Khorne's blessing to find another way to solve the immediate crisis. But if you walk by the river often, you're bound to get your shoes wet. If I really get corrupted and fall, that'll be a big joke. I'd better not wishful think and deal with it carefully with all my attention. Luo Sha, who had frowned and then relaxed, slowly fell into contemplation. His other hand kept tapping on the armrest of the metal seat, making a series of dull collision sounds. Soon after, Luo Sha's attention returned to the simulator's reward options. He only glanced at the first reward before completely skipping it. The second reward only had a label that attracted Luo Sha to read it carefully. In the end, he unhesitatingly chose the third reward, the enhancement surgery. Buzz buzz buzz. The next moment, accompanied by a series of accelerating blood flow sounds from inside Luo Sha's eardrums. Deep within the area between his sturdy abdomen and chest, a tide-like, repeatedly surging growth pain suddenly arose. However, the degree of pain was still within Luo Sha's tolerance. So there was no change in his expression. Dozens of seconds later, the growing pain completely disappeared, replaced by the subtle sound of accelerated blood flow throughout his body, constantly impacting his sensitive eardrums. Luo Sha slowly stood up from the metal seat. He took a deep breath and turned to walk towards the training ground. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The sharp-edged blood scythe slashed through the air, emitting a sharp whistling sound. In the brightly lit, empty training ground, Luo Sha, who was already sweating, wielded the huge scythe back and forth with both hands, making repeated attacks, chops, and sweeps. He was testing how much his combat ability had increased, and also trying to explore the special abilities of the pebble kidney. But for now, perhaps only when encountering a battlefield environment filled with toxins, or encountering highly toxic harmful substances, can the special function of the pebble kidney be fully activated. Of course, the benefits brought by the third enhancement surgery were also obvious. At least Luo Sha's physical strength and endurance had increased significantly. He had just tentatively used Shadow Step 3 times. Not only was he not completely exhausted, but the remaining physical strength could still support him to continue wielding the blood scythe for a while. Just as Luo Sha was carrying the blood scythe in one hand, intending to leave the training ground, an automatic robot walking in a hurry quickly approached him. Radatata wants me. Luo Sha saw at a glance the simple sign language that the automatic servo robot barely made with its mechanical tentacles. He first nodded slightly, and then threw the blood scythe into the mechanical tentacles of the automatic servo robot. Then, his tall figure slowly walked towards the forging workshop on the third basement level. At this moment, the constantly roaring forging workshop was far busier than in the past. An almost uncountable number of automatic servo robots were running back and forth in the metal aisle without stopping. They can be said to be the cornerstone of the entire forging workshop. Their efficiency and ability far exceeded ordinary workers. Radatata, do you need me for something? At this moment, Luo Sha swayed his tall figure and stepped into the tech priest's messy territory. He stared at the servo skull floating in midair and shouted loudly. Because the forging sounds from nearby were too loud, Luo Sha had to increase the volume of his voice. Respected Primarch, you've arrived. Radatata, who was jumping back and forth by driving the anti-gravity engine, also subconsciously increased the volume of the sound-generating device. It quickly passed through the air, approached Luo Sha, and shouted loudly. Primarch, there is now bad news and good news, which one do you want to hear first? Then let's hear the bad news first. Luo Sha, who had frowned slightly, said to Radatata without hesitation. The bad news is that the Valkyrie Transport's vector engine is really beyond saving. Instead of spending a lot of time to repair it, it's better to replace it completely with a new one. Radatata, whose eye sockets were flashing red, floated back and forth in midair. It drove the anti-gravity engine to fly around Luo Sha a few times, and said loudly. Then let's think of a way, Tech Priest Radatata. Without a flying vehicle, any of our actions will be difficult. Ordinary flying vehicles can be bought at will, but they can't meet our mission requirements. However, since you came to me, it means that you already have a plan, Radatata. What's the good news? Luo Sha, who had frowned slightly, first shook his head. He slightly raised his chin, his eyes staring at Radatata's short mechanical pincers, and slowly asked. Haha, as expected of the Primarch who knows me best. The red light in Radatata's eye socket seemed to be a bit brighter. It quickly stopped its circling movements, driving the anti-gravity engine to stop in front of Luo Sha. That mechanical kid in armor has fulfilled the design drawings for the second-generation arc reactor according to your agreement with him. I have to say, his thinking and ideas are indeed those of a genius scientist among humans. In short, according to my experience, analysis and judgment, the second-generation arc reactor can maintain a stable output for a long time, and the battery life has also been greatly increased. In this way, it is barely enough to become one of the power sources for flying vehicles. Plus my in-depth understanding of the disassembly and learning of vector engines, a dual-power flying vehicle is not a luxury. In addition, I also found a detailed disassembly report on SHIELD's Quinjet fighter from the hard drives you scavenged everywhere. Although it's not a complete design drawing, it's enough for a knowledgeable tech priest who likes to modify things. So, Primarch, the new model of Valkyrie Transport is already waving its wings to you. Dual power sources that can be switched at any time, high load transport capacity, a more modern streamlined shell, weapon modules that can be added or reduced at any time according to mission requirements. Primarch, more quantity without increasing the price. Don't hesitate. The ever-eloquent Reditus painted a wonderfully enticing picture for Roche. After a moment of thoughtful consideration, he chose to agree to the tech priest's plan to build a new flying vehicle. Although Roche could acquire other types, or even more models, of flying vehicles through the simulator. These were mostly independent, one-of-a-kind items. Perhaps an elite combat squad would find them more than sufficient, even overly extravagant. But for Roche, whose subordinates were gradually increasing in number, flying vehicles that could be mass-produced were undoubtedly a more cost-effective option. Therefore, Roche instructed Reditus to use the Valkyrie transport, which was nearing scrap condition, as a basic framework, and modify it into a prototype with a dual-power system for testing. If more problems were discovered, it would be easier to adjust the design data before establishing a production line. Hearing Rock's quick reply, Reditus immediately plunged into the magical modification plan for the new flying vehicle with joy. After Roche returned to the base hall from the scorching hot forge workshop, just as he sat back down in the metal chair, a hint of suspicion suddenly flickered in his eyes. Could it be that Reditus wanted to repair the Valkyrie transport, but his skills were lacking and he completely ruined the vector engine? And because he knew it was our only flying vehicle at the moment, he cleverly painted me a grand picture to make amends. Given the Servo Skull's mischievous personality, that's not impossible. Roche, belatedly realizing, seemed to vaguely perceive the truth of the matter. But since he had already agreed, it was completely unworthy to argue and dwell on this trivial matter with the Servo Skull. Moreover, Reditus's new flying vehicle was indeed a better choice. At that moment, Roche slowly exhaled. He decided to let it go, pretending he knew nothing. After all, everyone should hide some small secrets. With a hearty appetite, Roche finished the greasy ribs in front of him, which had completely cooled. Just as he was about to get up and return to the rest area for a break, another automated servo robot, following remote instructions from Iron Man David, brought over stacks of files related to various businesses with the Imperial Heavy Industries. Temporarily lacking Iron Man David's assistance, Roche had no choice but to sit back down in the metal chair. With a slight frown, he carefully reviewed the contents of the files, while signing his name to indicate approval or postponement. He didn't know how much time had passed. After all the stacks of files were processed and handed over to the automated servo robot, Roche, whose expression seemed rather numb, suddenly yawned, revealing the sharp fangs in his mouth. Then, he stretched fiercely, and the muscles and bones throughout his body seemed to burst out with a series of crisp sounds. Ah, no wonder I've heard of Terra High Lords or planetary governors being worked to death by their busy schedules. I remember even the Primarch Guilliman was troubled by the Imperium's complex affairs. It turns out that processing various files is also so energy-consuming. In the future, I should try to leave these matters to David as much as possible. At least his multi-core processor system is much faster than my single-core processor with only one brain. Roche, leaning back in the metal chair, couldn't help but mutter to himself in a self-deprecating manner. He slowly closed his eyes, intending to rest for a moment. However, in the next second, Roche reopened his eyes as if remembering something important. He subconsciously opened the simulator, swiping the page to the salvage section. At this time, the countdown for the designated salvage only had a few dozen seconds left. And Roche, who was originally listless and drowsy, instantly perked up. He straightened his back in an instant. His gaze was fixed on the time of the salvage countdown until it completely ended. Designated salvage countdown, 0. Designated salvage, healing item. Salvage reward, Panacea STC. Note: this is a very ancient and precious STC. It records a type of gene drug invented by humans during the dark age of technology, which can almost perfectly cure all diseases. Note: it is a precious technological heritage excavated by the Adeptus Mechanicus from the ruins on the planet Viridian Ix, but before long it was stolen by an orc mechaniac, and after a life-and-death struggle, it finally fell into the hands of the Dark Eldar Lady Malice, who is the culprit who targeted the human heritage. Note: it is said that the homunculus covens of Comorig have developed an iterative version more suitable for them, producing gene drugs that are almost immune to all toxins and poisons, and will also grant the user's body incredibly amazing regeneration abilities. Note: children, strive to spread the gospel of the panacea to the cold universe, Father Nurgle may suffer from severe depression because of this, he. At this moment, Roche, whose breathing suddenly became much heavier, suddenly widened his eyes. His gaze was fixed on the Panacea STC displayed on the designated salvage page. For a moment, Roche couldn't even believe whether what he saw was real or fake. After the two hearts beating fiercely inside his chest completely calmed down, Roche took a deep breath. He began to carefully and meticulously read all the notes of the salvaged items, and repeatedly confirmed that there were no prompts or warnings related to chaos on it. Finally, the beaming Roche extracted the first standard construction template of his life without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, a black metal cube, only the size of a human head and shaped like a Rubik's cube, slowly floated into his palm. Squinting his eyes, Roche carefully brought the black metal cube to his face. He clearly saw on the surfaces with a faint metallic luster the complex ingredients required to manufacture the Panacea and the basic steps on how to operate the STC to start the operation, all marked out one by imperial characters. After Roche once again calmed down the irrepressible excitement and joy, he immediately got up from the metal chair, turning his head and running towards the material storage room. There, almost a large number of materials that Roche had previously used to study the simulator were stored. Among them, there are also some basic ingredients that can be used to manufacture the Panacea. And the idiot-proof operation of the standard construction template means that even a human with intellectual disabilities can gradually figure it out. Accompanied by a series of extremely subtle valve opening and closing sounds, the black metal cube, shaped like a Rubik's cube, slowly opened small, hollow squares inside. At this moment, the focused Roche didn't even blink. He wore protective goggles on his face and carefully held his breath. He began to put in various types of basic materials one by one according to the formula sequence engraved on the surface of the metal cube. When all the small squares were filled with materials, click, the black metal cube instantly retracted all the squares. Immediately afterwards, on the surface of the metal cube, which did not leave any gaps, layers of hazy light waves seemed to gradually rise, rippling outwards. The extremely cautious Roche shook his tall body and backed away a few steps. Then, when he realized that it was just the characteristic of the Panacea's STC being activated, he subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. My performance just now was like a monkey who has never seen the world. Well, facing a standard template construct that can automatically produce Panacea without connecting to energy and without any extra operations, I, with my barren knowledge, may really just be a monkey. Speaking of which, are other standard template constructs so convenient? I'll ask Redditus later. As a tech priest, he should have seen other types of STC, right? Rock's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze hidden behind the protective goggles. He muttered to himself. About half an hour later, the hazy light waves covering the surface of the metal cube slowly dissipated. The entire black metal cube seemed to fall into complete silence. The next second, a square in the middle of the cube quietly rose upwards, opening the closed entrance. Huff. Roche rubbed his palms and couldn't help but take a deep breath. He suppressed his impatient excitement and quickly stepped forward. In the depths of that rising square, 13 ice-blue substances, each only the size of a fingertip, with distinct edges and corners and crystal clear, were very clearly presented in front of Roche. Then, Roche, with a hint of doubt in his eyes, used his fingers, wearing medical gloves, carefully pinched an ice-blue Panacea that looked like a gemstone or crystal. Ah, is this the Panacea? Why does it look like Heisenberg's special rock candy, at first glance? Roche muttered to himself, repeatedly feeling the coldness and hardness brought by the Panacea at his fingertips. Forget it, I'll still ask Teacher Connors to study the specific effects. If there are no accidents, this should be a success, right? Rock's thoughts turned quickly as he squinted his eyes. He casually grabbed all the Panacea in the square, turned around, and walked towards the door of the material storage room. However, before his tall body had taken a few steps, Roche turned around, grabbed the Panacea STC, which had returned to a complete metal cube, and walked towards the door again. Dash 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 dash. Holding the STC and the panacea, Rorschach quickly entered Connor's laboratory and put on a mask and protective clothing in an orderly manner. Then, Rorschach had just stepped out of the door of the disinfection room. He saw a green, humanoid lizard wearing a white coat and a pair of small glasses on his flat cheeks, sitting at a laboratory table, bending over and calculating some data. "Teacher, why are you doing human experiments on yourself again?" Rorschach frowned slightly and sighed subconsciously. He slowly walked to the opposite side of the laboratory table and gently put down the panacea and the STC in his hand. "Oh, Rorschach, you're here. Isn't our base going to relocate? I'm also trying to produce results as soon as possible. Although I stay in the laboratory for a long time, it doesn't mean I don't know the external pressure you are under now." Connors slightly raised his lizard head, which was covered in armored scales. A pair of yellow, vertical pupils seemed to have no emotional fluctuations. But the slightly low voice was full of concern. "Teacher, I know you're doing it for everyone's good, but you can't always use yourself as a test subject. What if a more serious mutation occurs? As long as you give the order, the gang dogs can search the whole city for those damned murderers." Rorschach casually took off the mask on his face. He said helplessly to Connors in his lizard form, "Hee, don't worry, next time, I'm just too anxious to know how many defects there are in the limb regeneration medicine. And look, doing experiments also has a hand and a tail to help, how great. By the way, Rorschach, is there anything you need me for?" Connors shook his lizard head and let out a low laugh. He raised his hand, took off the pair of small glasses on his face, and stared at Rorschach with his yellow, vertical pupils. At this moment, Rorschach, with a calm expression, raised his hand and pointed to the STC and the 13 panacea on the table, and slowly said, "Teacher, this is the STC standard template construct I told you about, and this thing is a precious STC about gene therapy drugs. If it is placed in Redditus' hometown, it will probably set off a terrifying war that sweeps countless planets. Even if it is thrown here, if everyone knows its efficacy, a war will be inevitable." Hearing Rorschach's introduction, Connors, sitting on the chair, subconsciously straightened his tall lizard body. A thick lizard tail swayed slightly behind him. "Although I am not a real expert in physical science, I can tell from the appearance of this thing that the technology content far exceeds modern times. Rorschach, what disease does this gene drug treat?" Connors' yellow, vertical pupils repeatedly looked at the Rubik's Cube-shaped panacea STC, and asked casually, "All diseases on Earth. Perhaps incurable special diseases will be encountered in the universe in the future, but now, I dare to be 100% sure that the panacea can cure 99.9% of diseases." Rorschach narrowed his eyes and couldn't help but grin, saying with a faint smile. A pair of snow-white fangs seemed to be glowing slightly under the soft light of the laboratory. For a moment, Connors seemed to be stunned in place. Then, in his lizard form, he suddenly supported his upper body with excitement. Even the thick tail behind him sweeping down the chair seemed to go unnoticed. "Rorschach, are you really not lying to me? Is this really a gene therapy drug? And it's a panacea that can cure all diseases?" Connors subconsciously widened his pair of yellow, vertical pupils and stared intently at the subtle expression on Rorschach's face. Rorschach nodded heavily with a calm expression. He said earnestly, "Teacher, you should know my character, I never slack off on important matters. This is indeed 100% panacea, but I can't guarantee the specific effect to you. Everything still needs you to personally test and verify how effective the panacea is. Teacher, I don't mean to let you do human experiments on yourself to verify the test. Because I don't even know what this thing that the STC just made is, maybe it's some kind of failed toxic substance. Don't worry, Rorschach, leave everything to me." Before Rorschach could finish speaking, Connors, breathing a little heavily, shook his lizard head vigorously. He suddenly stretched out a sharp-fingered claw and grabbed a crystal-clear, ice-blue panacea. His tall body turned and walked towards the many analysis instruments in the laboratory. Watching Teacher Connors in his humanoid lizard form enter a state of mad experimentation once again, Rorschach, who wanted to continue to say something, could only quietly close his mouth. He shrugged helplessly, turned around, and walked out of the laboratory. Connors, the humanoid lizard, was holed up in the laboratory, practically working around the clock. If it weren't for the automated service robots delivering his 3 meals a day, which he still ate regularly. Roche, who occasionally went outside the lab to observe, even considered forcibly entering to interrupt Connors's frantic research. After all, whether the panacea could be used was secondary. If the already scarce scientific personnel, the biological sage, went crazy first, he would have no one to reason with. Fortunately, Professor Connors's manic state didn't last too long. 72 hours later, Roche, having completed his physical training, was reading in the base's main hall. He would occasionally change things up, flipping through various documents from Imperial Heavy Industries. Just then, a middle-aged man with thick golden hair and both arms, deliberately exposed, completely unharmed, walked out of the dimly lit underground passage with a smile on his face. It was Connors, who had just left the laboratory. Once he stood in front of the metal round table, and placed his 2 arms, with completely different skin tones, heavily on the table. Roche, narrowing his eyes slightly, carefully examined the pair of arms. He glanced at Connors, who was in a state of great excitement, took a deep breath, and said in a serious tone, "Professor, if there's a next time, I'll forcibly assign an automated service robot as your experiment monitor." This had nothing to do with the team's rules or orders. It was purely because Roche didn't want to witness a close mentor and friend eventually becoming a mass of writhing flesh due to long-term human experimentation. Hearing Rock's slightly stern tone, Connors, with a smile on his face, also regained his composure. He nodded emphatically and said seriously, "Roche, thank you for your concern and understanding. I know I've been too indulgent in some things, and I promise not to make the same mistake again, because the knot in my heart that has plagued me for years has been untied. The limb regeneration serum has been successfully researched." Even though Connors tried to suppress the smile on his face, the twisted face that almost stretched the wrinkles on his forehead still betrayed his inner emotions. Roche seemed to have forgotten his harsh words just now. He casually threw down the Imperial book in his hand. A hint of probing desire seemed to flow in his eyes. "So, the panacea has really been successfully created by me. And the effect is far beyond imagination." Rock's question may have opened the floodgates of Connors's long-accumulated words. He subconsciously licked his lips and said incessantly, "Roche, you're not a scientist with abundant knowledge and theory, you don't understand. The existence of the panacea is a huge mystery. A miracle that is difficult to fathom. And those who created the standard construction template for the panacea may have touched the boundary of the so-called God. You haven't seen it with your own eyes. The gene molecular formula inside a panacea is as vast and magnificent as the stars in the universe. Many, many molecular formulas that I have never seen or even dared to think of are presented before my eyes one by one. Ironically, I actually did a helpless act close to brute force, which is to extract some of the molecular formulas and constantly recombine them with my limb regeneration serum, until the unknown molecular formula in the panacea completely replaced the molecular formula that can trigger the lizard transformation. Yes, rather than studying the panacea, it's better to say that I still know nothing about it." As soon as Connors finished speaking, a faint bitter smile and loss appeared on his face. And Roche, who was only responsible for listening, smiled slightly. He interlaced his fingers and stared at the other party to comfort him. "Oh, that's okay, Professor. According to Redditus's mumbling, this kind of thing is called a technology black box, which is the so-called knowing what it is, but not knowing why it is. I know the method and order of manufacturing this item, but I don't know how it works, and I can't change the manufacturing process without authorization. Redditus has seen too many similar things. Even some of the weapons and equipment it has created now, if you want to hear it explain the underlying scientific principles clearly, it's better to let it face a gang of Necrons Gauss flayers again. If you don't know how to resolve this emotion, you can also go to Redditus to chat, but maybe its way is to praise the Omnisea or sing the praises of the machine god a few times when encountering problems." Hearing Rock's comfort, especially the last joking remark, Connors and Roche smiled at each other subconsciously, and took the opportunity to turn over this topic. Afterwards, Connors began to introduce to Roche his initial research on the panacea and the effect of the limb regeneration serum. The panacea is indeed 100% real and effective. And it can indeed cure all diseases so far. After all, even the limb regeneration serum, which has a small part of the panacea's unknown molecular formula, can easily cure Connors's hair loss and cervical spondylosis that have plagued him for many years. And judging from the fact that his golden hair and the entire body have completely returned to normal, perhaps the panacea can not only cure all diseases, it will also give the user regeneration ability that is not too weak for humans. As for the medicinal effect that has been renamed Panacea Revival Serum by the two people, if Connors's personal feelings have not gone wrong, then, no matter what kind of broken limbs, even a dying person who is seriously injured and only has one breath left, can be easily saved. If this is the case, Rorschach can deal with the bloody and terrifying foreign wars more calmly. Moreover, the emergence of the panacea also provides Rorschach and Imperial Heavy Industries with the best opportunity to extend their hidden tentacles to all parts of the world. However, all of this is still just Rorschach's crazy idea that has just been brainstormed. Even the basic plan has not been made. If you want to fully implement it, you may have to delay it until the second base is completed. At this moment, Rorschach and Connors, who were inspired to communicate, continued to talk for a while. Afterwards, he seemed to have remembered something. Suddenly asked Connors whether the Panacea Revival Serum could be used on human females. Connors was stunned at first. Then he also remembered Jessica Jones, who was still lying in the hospital. Once again immersed in the state of thinking, Connors said something casually to Rorschach. Immediately got up and ran towards the laboratory. Rorschach, who blinked his eyes, also slowly got up, followed behind him and walked over. If the Panacea Revival Serum cannot be used due to lack of experimental data, then the verified Panacea should be no problem. Rorschach thought silently as he stepped forward. Above the city of New York, the gloomy clouds still lingered. However, the heavy snowstorm that had lasted for days had ceased its rampage. Amidst the bustling flow of traffic and people, the city's vitality seemed to be gradually returning. On the streets and alleys, New York police officers in thick uniforms, with their potbellies, were cooperating with charitable organizations in clearing the accumulated snow. They were trying their best to collect the homeless people who had unexpectedly died from the sudden cold temperature. At this moment, Luo Shaw, wearing a black trench coat, walked past from a nearby street, stepping on the snow that had not yet been completely cleared. He slightly turned his gaze, calmly scanning the stiff corpses with bizarre smiles on their faces. He continued walking towards the road ahead. At the same time, a small bottle of illusion dust was firmly tied to his thick wrist. It swayed gently with the movement of his entire body. At this moment, Luo Shaw was on his way to the Manhattan District General Hospital. That was where Jessica's private medical center was located. Originally, he had planned to take Jessica, whose injuries had not completely healed, directly back to the underground base. He intended to use the Panacea or the Panacea Rebirth Potion to complete the final treatment. However, this decision was immediately met with strong opposition from a neurosurgeon who was specifically responsible for Jessica's medical process. The reason given by the other party was also very straightforward. If the patient's family members move the patient out of the hospital without authorization, then the patient's bones that have not completely healed, as well as the nerve tissue that has just been repaired through surgery, will be at risk of breaking again. And he didn't want to bear a similar medical lawsuit, thereby ruining his perfect resume. Therefore, even though the Empire Heavy Industries liaison team almost wore out their lips and promised not to sue the other party for this reason, the attending neurosurgeon still did not agree to Jessica being discharged without authorization, unless the patient has completely recovered. In this way, the choice fell into Luo Shaw's hands again. He could either have the legal department of Empire Heavy Industries come forward, which would take a lot of time to get Jessica discharged, or directly enter the hospital, under the guise of visiting, to have Jessica take the Panacea for a complete recovery, so as to return smoothly. So, Luo Shaw, who was unwilling to continue waiting, once again stepped out of the underground base. This also made him subconsciously miss the convenience brought by Iron Man David when he was still by his side. After all, it's easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. Moreover, if Iron Man David were to handle similar matters, he might not even have to step out of the base's gate. However, this kind of day will not last too long. According to the report recently sent by Iron Man David, it has successfully found several large islands with hidden locations and very rich seabed minerals. It is leading the automatic servo robots to carry out the final exploration operation. Once Iron Man David determines the specific location of the second base, the tedious preliminary excavation work will be completely handed over to those automatic servo robots. And Iron Man David, who has been missing for a long time, can return to its home field. The remote command and control of the construction task of the second base will be possible. Luo Xia, dressed in a black trench coat, blended into the diverse crowd in a very low-key manner. He quietly entered the bustling general hospital. Luo Xia did not choose the more crowded elevator. Instead, following the impression left by the last visit, he walked towards the staircase passage. When he slowly climbed up to the 5th floor, and successfully bypassed the nurse who was patrolling the ward, arriving at the door of Jessica's private ward, Luo Xia's keen hearing clearly picked up a man's voice from inside the soundproofed ward. "Ms. Jessica, I know that you may possess special abilities or physiques that ordinary people cannot have, but as long as you are still a carbon-based life form, the repair of bones and muscles requires a lot of time to recover. This is not some unscrupulous doctor's continuous routine of defrauding patients' medical insurance, but a simple law of conservation of energy. Oh, with your education, it's difficult for me to explain it to you clearly, so I won't explain it to you. You just need to know that the hospital's joint decision is to prohibit you from being discharged early." As soon as the man's teasing words fell, Jessica's voice immediately rang out. It's just that her tone seemed to be full of anger and anxiety. "Doctor, I've already said that I'm willing to take all the responsibility. Why aren't you allowing me to be discharged even if I want to? I came here for treatment, and my boss has spent a lot of money. Is this how you treat patients?" "Haha, that's right, we here are the most expensive private medical center in New York. Service is the main thing, the customer is supreme. But at the same time, it also means that we attract wealthy and powerful upper classes with extremely high medical skills and a perfect reputation. I can't allow any medical flaws that may damage the hospital or even my personal reputation to appear in my hands. Don't be angry, Ms. Jessica, this is not discrimination against you personally, but a small precaution taken by the hospital." The man's calm voice rang out again. And this explanation of his obviously only brought Jessica's incomprehensible indignation. At this time, Luo Xia, who had been eavesdropping outside the door for a while, shook his head slightly. One of his palms gently grasped the handle of the ward door. He slowly pushed the door open inward. "Jessica, I told you, don't easily fall into the trap of emotions when you encounter any difficulties. The more you indulge your emotions, the more the development of things will exceed your control." Inside the brightly lit private ward, as soon as Luo Xia stepped into this place, his gaze first fixed on the tall, thin man wearing a doctor's coat, with his arms crossed, leaning against the ward window. Then, he said lightly to Jessica, who was lying on the luxurious hospital bed, sulking with a sullen face. "Ah, good afternoon, boss," accompanied by Jessica's suddenly widened eyes and sharply raised tone. Luo Xia, with a subconscious polite smile on the corner of his mouth, slowly stepped forward. Immediately afterwards, he and the tall, thin man who straightened his back and looked at him almost simultaneously extended their palms towards each other. Luo Xia, Jessica's boss and teacher, maybe also her guardian. Stephen Strange, neurosurgeon, not a doctor. The two people's palms slightly touched each other and then slowly released, drooping beside them. Luo Xia, who narrowed his eyes, did not turn his head to care about Jessica's situation. He just stared at Strange's thin face, and said with a smile, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Strange. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.